Hello everybody, my name is Jess, co-company manager and director of the Fabularium. I am a 28 white female with a bright pink fleece on and long light brown hair in a ponytail.
Hello, my name is Gareth. I'm another co-company manager of the Fabularium. I'm a 32-year-old white male. I have long brown hair that's down at the moment, and I have a beard. I'm wearing a black collared t-shirt that has 3 little balloons on it.
Hi, my name is Josh. I am a 30-year-old male wearing a black t-shirt. I'm mixed race of Asian and white heritage. And I also have long dark hair, currently in a ponytail down the back.
Great, so that's us.
Oh, and just a quick housekeeping thing. We are in a school hall because it's hammering it down and the rain is really loud on the roof. So if you hear any kind of background noise, that probably is us. And it's actually at one point louder than you guys were. So I'm really sorry about that.
Anyway, the Fabularium was founded in 2010 as part of Coventry University. It was part of some action research with the graduates to kind of create a troupe of performers in the middle of town and to base on outdoor theatre. And then they performed as part of the Coventry Mysteries, promenading through Broadgate, Coventry city centre and things like that, but then the funding got cut. So then in 2015, we took it on as a limited company. And now we tour work internationally, nationally, outdoors, indoors, school halls, forests, fields, festivals, things like that, with cart shows, walkabouts, and indoor work as well. So yeah.
Yeah, and when we first sort of picked up turning it into a business, we started developing walkabout acts and static shows and everything. One of our first gigs as a professional company was actually was being invited by Creative People and Places up in the Lincolnshire area, where we went over to Spalding and Boston to go and perform out there, which was interesting because we were almost a support act for Strange Face Theatre, and they developed a show on the back of a lorry, on a flatbed lorry, so that they could tour the show to various different locations across that area to create accessible work. And they asked us to perform in front of it and do a little warm-up, which was a great introduction to not only to performing as a professional company, but then also seeing actually how work can be created to be taken directly to areas of low engagement and areas that wouldn't necessarily be performance spaces.
Which is really important, we think, for quite rural communities as well. Is it's not always easy for them to come out, go back into the main towns, which is actually one of the things that we're doing here in Bolton. Is we're doing a lot of shows in the big surrounding area of Bolton and really trying to reach the harder to reach communities.
And for example, in terms of physical impairment, we had a lady who just had a hip operation, and we were in a big block of flats, kind of a square shaped, and we were performing in the green, and she still wanted to watch from her window, so we kind of moved all of our set around so that she could still watch from the comfort of her bed as well, and people watch from the balcony and things like that. So in terms of physical impairment, it's about bringing it to them rather than them having to kind of journey all the way into to see us. We also do that, but we also bring it to the people as well, which we think is very important.
One of the main things that we are quite passionate about as a company is we make shows that have very little requirements from producers and promoters, and we try and make our shows as adaptable as possible. So our staging is kind of primarily built on wheels, like a big market cart, and we don't need power. We don't need an indoor space to get changed. We don't need, we just need reasonable amount of access for us to get stuff in. Even that doesn't matter. We can carry things. We try and be as adaptable as possible. Even the ground doesn't have to be super flat for most of our shows. To try and eliminate as many problems as possible and make it as easy as possible to put our shows on any. community centres. And for example, today we just went from outside, our internet's going a bit rubbish, sorry. We've gone from outside to inside and it doesn't matter. We don't have any issues with that. So we can be as adaptable as possible.
Yeah.
So in terms of the work that we do and the range that we do, so we spoke about kind of having static shows which are performed upon our carts, and those kind of shows we usually do in a bigger setting in terms of urban festivals and greenfield festivals and kind of school halls and the bigger areas. But we also do a lot of walkabouts as well, which we find are the most intimate and most accessible for our audiences. So we've got a range of walkabouts. We've got a flock of chaotic sheep that run riot and kind of steal prams and beer and all those things.
Steal empty prams.
Empty prams, not babies. We don't steal babies. But we like to cause a lot of we like to play lots of pranks and tricks, which again is non-verbal as well. So in terms of engagement and accessibility, there's no words, it's just sheep noises and barring and lots of laughing and maybe a song or two as well. So we love that one. We've also got our animal archetypes. So should we share some pictures?
Oh no, let's do some real life sharing.
Yes, so we've got some animal headpieces that we wear. A lot of our work does involve these headpieces, and the characters that go with them are very archetypal and kind of stereotypical of the animals that they portray, which again we find that we can get down on people's level and kind of engage through this rather than our faces. We can really engage through another creature, and
we're very passionate about especially animals. We really love performing as animals, and we're aware that children especially really relate to animals and animal noises. It's part of learning, and also puppets are actually quite an accessible way in to help people with certain difficulties kind of access our work. So and really obvious animal movements is actually really quite empowering, and people really get stuck in making noises and making shapes with us, which we're really quite passionate about. And because we're free to do anything, we really like to go anywhere with these, which is really lovely. Such as, let's talk about that.
Yeah, so we've had a few gigs that were sort of out of the norm for us to go and explore new space and everything. One of the most interesting ones, and actually quite a heartfelt one, is we did tour when we were debuting our show Reynard the Fox down in London. We took an hour or two to visit Art St George's down in London and go and do a walkabout in a hospital to the children's ward and do a bit of walkabout there, which was amazing. It was really lovely, and it was such a lovely warm welcome. But to do a short show in one of the smaller rooms with the kids that could come to us, and then being able to do a walkabout and perform a couple songs to the kids in their beds in the wards, and that was a very rewarding thing. But being able to keep everyone included and bring it to them was really wonderful and really interesting and a new step for us.
And that's when we find we can have the most intimate and detailed interaction, when we can be on that walkabout and we can just be one-on-one with an audience member, and we can obviously read the person and the way they want to approach they might want to engage from a distance, and that's still a really intimate and engaging way of performing. Or we can really be down on their level and kind of do a handshake together, or they can feel and vary, a lot of them. So they really is kind of a really sensory experience.
Just to elaborate, just because again I realised that we didn't do any audio description upon the headpieces that we presented. They're made out of foam and cardboard and then covered in material. So there's a lot of paintwork into that, and we'll show you a picture in a moment. But it's the fox is very much foam teeth and beautiful red fur and very delicately hand-painted eyes, and the hair, again, same hand-painted eyes, but huge long ears and covered in this beautiful fake fur.
And another thing that we're quite passionate about outside of the walkabouts is when we do static shows, is because we don't have power, because we don't want to use that kind of thing, we want it to be as accessible as possible. So we are quite passionate about being in open spaces, especially at festivals, and greenfield sites are really difficult for some people with certain needs, but we try and make it so that there's always a path or an entranceway or flat ground or an area that we can go, that is where a wheelchair could be, and we make it as accessible as possible in our location. We try not to, where possible, be stuck behind something. We want to be as open and as visible and as accessible from any angle for everybody and anybody.
Yeah, and that's the big pull factor for us in cityscape areas and urban areas, is that, you know, the more open, the more town centre based, big open city square, the better, because then it is a chance for anyone to come across it, anyone to be involved, anyone to feel that they can participate and make it, of course.
And then, so we've spoken about our static shows and our walkabouts, and there's one show in particular that is called There Be Monsters, which is a promenade piece, which means we take the audience on a journey and they follow us as we go through. So rather than being static in one place, the audience kind of follow us on a journey. So that was a real great opportunity for us to explore accessibility with all the sites that we visit, making sure that all paths and all locations are accessible for anybody who wants to come along on the journey with us, and we encourage that to do so, and we encourage people to help. My character's got like a big cart, and we encourage the children to kind of help and join and really feel a part of the story as well. And this particular story involved a lot of audience interaction as well, which they take on some of the roles and they join in, becoming the bartender and the duchess, and we give them some costume, and they kind of not volunteer, but we kind of force them to kind of join in with us, which they willingly do so when they're in front of an audience most of the time. But this in particular story was inspired by the Spanish tale of Don Quixote, and we explored the theme of dementia with that one quite deeply. And we had a workshop with the Belgrade Arts Gymnasium, who have a dementia or drama workshop. Me and Gareth went along and kind of spent some time working with those people and talking about what it's like to live with dementia and kind of the terminology. So when we addressed some of those themes within the work, that we were being sensitive to that, but also opening it up to a younger audience and going, yeah, this does happen, and you know, it's okay, and this is the way it is, and it was through comedy, as you may know, that dementia can make people think of some really wonderful things and really wonderful images that can become quite humorous to people on the outside. But it was a really good starting point to get younger audiences in particular to understand what it might be like for somebody who's living with dementia.
Yeah, we also discovered quite viscerally in that workshop that music was a real key to unlocking people's minds, and our shows are based on music. They're built on music. Nearly everything is storyboarded around our songs, and so we're really passionate that music and visual, like quite bright, bold visuals and big physicality, is all part of our language of a show. To again, so people 200 meters away can still see and hear something and engage and get what we're doing, rather than it being quite subtle. We're not too bothered about being subtle in our work, which is really nice. Again, as accessible as possible and fun. On every level.
Yeah, should we share with you some images?
Yeah,
and
we've
have
got
a
some
little
images,
chat about
and then I guess questions.
Any questions after that? So yeah, we'll just talk about.
Take turns, just describing it.
So this was a show at Trentham Gardens.
Yes, Stoke
with Reynard the Fox. And this is one of our static shows. So as you can see, the venue is kind of put out.
Jess, I don't know if you can hear me, but I've not got.
Pardon?
Oh, there we go. Sorry, the images are now on the screen. I don't know if that was the same for everybody, but it was just black before, but I will now be quiet and let you carry on.
That's okay. I think it's the internet. So this is a picture of us in Trentham Gardens performing Reynard the Fox. Lots of families, beautiful sunny day, green backdrop with forests, people on deck chairs. So this is a kind of it was a ticketed event, I think, that anybody could join, and they, they're made accessible by having a kind of flat ground, and anybody could join. You could come and sit really close to us as well.
Cool. I'll just rattle through these photos. Here's a close-up of some of our animals. So this is from our show, The Hare and the Moon. And on the left, we have
Gareth, I'm so sorry to interrupt.
And in the middle, we have myself as the Arctic bear with an accordion, and then right we have Josh as a snow with a. I'll panic is yeah.
Hello. Well, we'll stop sharing those pictures because I think it might be causing a bit of a problem. But we can send you some pictures to add on to any of that
to look at later.
Yeah. So we'll go for some questions if anybody has any.
Yeah. Just before we do, could we do a little switch of the BSL interpreters just to give Erin her mind break and hand break?
Thank you, Erin.
Over to you, Gloria. Lisa, are we all good? Yeah, great. Fab. So shall we go into questions then? Are you happy with that? Fabularium? Yes. Yeah. I guess so. I have a couple of questions on because you work quite a lot in festival sort of contexts, and like you were saying, in green spaces. Do you have to, and how do you have to negotiate sort of access with in festival settings? Like you were talking about having paths up to be able to view it. I imagine I've not done loads of work in outdoor context, but I imagine festivals have, this is the space for this performance and this is the space for this performance. If you get to a space and you realise that actually somebody who needs to access this via wheelchair is unable to access this, how do you go about negotiating that with a festival?
I don't think we've had that issue too many times, actually, because normally we ask for somewhere quite quiet that we can access with a big park. So kind of by proxy, we're in a space that can allow that. But then there are some times which is the harsh reality, is that there are sometimes places where nothing's accessible. Just thinking about the Gardens of Delight, where there's some ways in, but then there's some paths we had that the landowner said, oh, you can't go up that way, you can't do that. So we tailored, because again we're not beholden to certain moments or certain props or certain things being in a certain place. We can tailor things to suit the openness as much as possible.
And then in those kind of situations, if, for example, we had the main show in a space that maybe wasn't as accessible as we'd like, we would always kind of do a walkabout pre-show and go around in a more accessible way so people can still engage for the show. And 9 times out of 10, we get given a site plan, and we can always discuss our kind of requirements and needs, and we go for a site visit and lots of things leading up to the performance that can be modified and changed with enough notice.
And do you, in sort of the preparation and the lead up to it, how do you, I guess, do you sort of, how do you tell people what the access problems might be, or is that a sort of festival responsibility, or is that your job as artists?
We do put it in our production packs that we send out as well, saying kind of we need this kind of area, and especially for There Be Monsters as well, we have to kind of go make it accessible. We need a clear pathway with, you know, a flat ground, and make sure there's, you know, a pathway for people to go, but also is there a detour for kind of prams and wheelchairs?
Well, you went a little bit robotic on that last bit. What did you say on that last section, Jess? Sorry.
Just about There Be Monsters in our production pack to have, making sure that we have a clear pathway, not only for pulling a cart, but also to make sure that there's a way for people to join us that have additional requirements and prams and wheelchairs and things like that. We need to find a route that, you know, that works for us, but also works for them as well.
And so then is it the festival, is it usually the festival's responsibility to pass that on to people who require it?
9 times out of 10, or a couple of times we've gone along and go, do you want to come and do a site visit with us, and we can plan together what the best route is, and they're going to go, okay, over there is, you know, so and so, over there, how do we fit it in and around here?
And also, a lot of festivals at the minute that we work with have some kind of accessibility officer, whether it's somebody that's got several hats on, or they've actually got a dedicated accessibility officer. And so quite often the festival is laid out in a really good way anyway, without us having to communicate those kind of questions. So our static animal shows in the woodland, those kind of things have already been answered, which is really great.
Yeah, I mean, that's good. It feels like maybe venues are behind in that than an outdoor setting. Does anybody else have any questions they would like to ask? Please feel free to. Oh, Philippa, I see your virtual hand raised.
I just wanted to chip into that, what you were saying about the festivals and what they're set up with. And I think what we all need to be doing a lot more is having access riders about what we require, and that we're not willing to be put in a place that isn't accessible for somebody in a wheelchair, or that it isn't stuck a very long away from any entrances, so that anybody with mobility issues has a long way to walk. And also about that, like if you go to some of the National Trust properties, for example, they have a little golf trolley that, you know, golf cart that will take people who can't walk the long distance down the drive. Now, don't expect your small festivals necessarily to do that, but there are things that can be done that make things. And I think we as small companies actually have to start lobbying those that aren't doing those things. Like you say, some festivals are doing a great job. At Festival are doing a lot of work around access, for example, and that's brilliant. But I think as small companies, we can take the good practice from one festival and say to another festival, why aren't you doing that? So I think we can be advocates in quite a strong way for that. So, yeah.
And I guess a bit, Fabularium, that's what your production pack does a little bit, is it says, here's what we need for the show, but also here's what we need for our audiences. We need to make sure that it's a space where wheelchair is able to access. Is that correct in your production pack?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And fortunately, the work that we create has always had that accessibility underneath it, without us even realizing how accessible it already is. So then to have a conscious thought of going, okay, we need to actually think, and as an ever-growing company, we need to have a conscious thought going forward, going, okay, we don't want to settle to go, oh, well, our work's accessible already. It's already accessible.
They'll think about it.
Yeah. We don't want to have kind of that notion about it. We want to make sure that it is you know, what do we need? Like you say, Paul, what do we need? But most importantly, and what's most important to us is the audience and what do they need. So yeah, for sure, I think, and as things progress within the arts and outdoors and things like that, as you say, I think some festivals are doing it really well, but as you say, Philippa, if we're advocates and going, right, have you thought about this, and this is what we need, and just put it as a given, put it as that this is what we need, and this is what the audience need, and then I'm hoping that all the festivals will just go, oh yeah, great.
I think it's that thing about not just asking what we need. Like you say, a lot of yours by almost by accident ensures that it is pretty physically accessible. But I think actually having a section that says audience access needs, like that's something we can do quite simply and add to our tour packs and things. Which if everybody's doing that, and I think a lot of people are very responsive, like you say, Paul. I think people working in outdoor settings, festivals and so on, have to be very adaptable for all sorts of reasons. So good at, if we're making those demands, I think we're more likely to see more of the smaller festivals responding to it as well. It might be wishful thinking, but I think we have to do that. I mean, Talking Birds has for a long time had a performance access audit. This really came from site-specific shows, but we use it for any venue, you know, an indoor venue, or we won't go to a place that isn't accessible. So we did get into quite a bit of a. We really annoyed one of our partners commissioners for a while who were looking for a space in a particular area, and the number of spaces that had to be checked out because we weren't prepared to go and do it somewhere that wasn't accessible. And I think you have to stick with your guns on that. And they were not happy about it. But actually, I pointed out that, you know, in terms of the Equality Act, we were, you know, helping them to be legal. And that wasn't something commissioners on that sort of site-specific work as well. You can be quite powerful if you know that stuff and they don't, but you can use it as a way of ensuring that they understand that you know, that stuff has to be cleared out of the disabled toilet. And no, it's not accessible. It's not acceptable to say we'll carry someone up the steps. You know, you have to provide an appropriate ramp for physical access. And you know, I think we can use that stick, if you like, of going, well, actually, according to the Equality Act, you need to do that. Anyway, I'll stop. I'll get off my bandwagon now.
Just want to quickly pick up on something in the chat. So Johnny was asking, access riders, great idea. Has anybody got an example template? And Collier has said that the unlimited websites section of resources have them, just in case anybody's watching on YouTube afterwards. Additionally, there is a similar concept of personal user manual, PUM in short, a one-page document where you can list visible and invisible disabilities and requests for accommodation at work. So they might be things which you can utilize in identifying and working with access needs. Fabularium, I wanted to pick up a little bit on the performance you did to children in beds in their hospital wards. Reynard the Fox, was that? Yeah, was that, did you do the whole performance?
So
Oh, sorry. I was going to ask, did you do the whole performance, or was it?
I was going to say, so. Sorry, I keep talking over you. So we did, I think we just did a short vignette, like a 5-10 minute performance. So it wasn't the main show, Reynard the Fox. It's just a short section of it, because we, again, getting to the space and all that, it was too hard to bring all the equipment up. So we just brought basic props, full costume and headpieces, and instruments and performance songs and everything. We just did that, and we did that in a nice little side room that was for the kids to their common room. And then and then when we walked around the wards, we just did interaction and songs. We didn't do any form of other storytelling performance other than that.
Yeah, because the time that we had in the building, it seemed unfair to do a full show, even if without the set, in one room, and then there were some people who couldn't access that because they were in a ward and couldn't move. So we did sections for more people, you know, a small section of the show for more people in the green room, common room, and then spent the rest of the time getting into all the rooms. So we did as much as we could of the show, but it seemed inappropriate with the time to try and do a full 45-minute show in
engaged. We'd rather split our time and both make sure everybody can get a bit, rather than doing one big show for a majority.
And it feels like what's running through quite a lot of what you've said is sort of adaptability feels really important, both in terms of moving the set to meet the woman in her bedroom window, just as it is being able to adapt elements of the show to take it out to hospital beds and things like that. So I don't know if you just want to pick up on that adaptability a bit more, because that feels like a really important thing for access of this kind, is that the people in those hospital beds are getting a really rich experience. Even if it's not the show, the full show, they're getting your characters and the joy of your characters and the big fancy costumes and things like that, which the rest of the audience, I think, would fall in love with.
Yeah, and I guess it's just going back to the core value of the audience being, our first and foremost thoughts. And you know, we want to have those rich interactions, and we want people to, you know, we have people going, oh, I've named my cat after you, to the cat that you've got. You know, we've been practicing our hair and tortoise routine when you came to see us, just, you know, walking along Worcester town centre and things like that. So yeah, and there's been a few times actually where we've actually taken headpieces off, and at least I have. I don't know if you do have those experiences, but you know, sometimes people do. Small children find them a bit overwhelming and go, "Oh, it's actually, I can't actually understand what this is," and then you can kind of take it off and put it to the side and go, "Actually, like this is a thing on its own." So we still have the richness of the character rather than the full show, but ultimately it's about what that person or that audience member wants to get out of it, and it's a lot of if they're able to kind of chat with them and ask questions and just try to pick some information about kind of their favourite animal, if we're doing animal walk, about their favourite animals, or you know, things like that, and just really kind of read into what the audience member enjoys or likes.
To go back to the kind of adaptability of the set, we're yes people within reason. We so for example, moving the set for the lady in the window, you know, there was a flat open space that was reasonably big that we could put the set anywhere. So we spent 10 minutes kind of going, what is the maximum viewing possibility, taking into consideration this window really awkwardly placed here, but then how can we give that window the best possible view and the most from then the front? So it made no difference to us really where we set the stage, because it's small enough really to kind of go anywhere in that environment, that we can just go, yeah, well, why not? You know, we're always up for that kind of adaptability. We're not precious at all about those kind of things.
And I guess the bigger the work is, maybe the harder it is to adapt. I mean, somebody else might disagree, but we're kind of quite small mid-scale at the moment. We're doing some R&D that might lead us into being kind of large scale and bigger scale touring work. It would be interesting to see how adaptable that would be in those kind of situations. I know we wouldn't probably have those kind of intimate interactions there, but on a bigger scale with a larger set, how easy, and maybe this is a question to you guys, how easy is it to kind of adapt a larger set, where at the moment we're being really quite flexible and adaptable, having a smaller, easily placed set and taking the characters out of that. So, but that's what we're trying to do as well. We're having kind of maybe a walkabout version and then the larger scale. But
just to jump in there as well, Philippa, I think attitude is quite right. We are passionate about our positive attitude with those things, and just to add to what Jess was saying, our set is is on wheels. So we actually very quickly, even though when it's fully set out, we very quickly can fold it all together and make it so it's just back on some wheels and we can move it. And we've done that a few times at festivals when the rain's hit really hard. We've just dragged the whole set under a big tree or under a canopy and carried on. And a lot of companies will go, no, it's raining, we can't do it. Or, oh, no, we've finished now, or our slot is over. And we're like, no, we'll drag everything. And, you know, people stick it out with us and we carry on. And that attitude gets people kind of fired up with us. And that's what makes us tick. That's what's really useful.
So I think that, as you said, it would be interesting to see how your bigger set, how you can do it with that. Like, now's the time to work that out, isn't it? So actually, do you need to make it in more bits? Because then you can wheel it quickly rather than it being really, you know, one big thing. So it's like thinking about it right at that design stage in your set as well as in your show, you know, in the content of your show.
Lisa, you have a virtual hand up. Philippa, I think you've still got your virtual hand up from before. There we go.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. I was just going to say a lot of the things that people have already touched on, so in the chat and Philippa, but just to sort of put out there as a provocation, doing R&D, that feels like the perfect opportunity to be able to build those things in so that you don't have to adapt later, and to build access in at this point, so it's not an afterthought. Okay, here's our show, now how do we make it accessible? So it's just it's not necessarily a question, it's kind of a provocation for people watching this and listening, and building that access in from a very early stage.
Yeah,
Definitely.
absolutely. And it's the same, we're getting turned on by the idea of like green thinking and environmental thinking. And if you and so any of these things that you go, actually, these are really important as core values and as artists, that this should all be thought about at the beginning, and access needs is just one of those major things that, yeah, should be part of sightline, should be a part of accessibility, should be a part of how our characters can interact. If they can't approach the show because they need to be so far away, let's go out to them, you know, or walkabout stuff. You know, we're starting to think about that now and going, well, that can help with those things. And I think you're totally right. Everything should be start to be in the fabric of the beginning.
Fab, I'm going to wrap it up there because I know you've got to go and razzle-dazzle the people of Bolton very shortly. Thanks so much for your talk and for answering your questions. We're going to just take a 5-minute break where Fabularium folk will escape. But when we come back, we'll go over to Dan, and there'll be more opportunities for questions later. So keep thinking up those questions and developing those thoughts. Thank you once again, Fabularium. Round of applause.
Thank you.
Have a good show. Break a leg.
Thank you.
Ooh, I'll send Lisa the
Images.
the PowerPoint images thing that we had. If you want to share that.
Yeah, we'll find a way to put it in the YouTube link below.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks. Bye. So we'll all join back at about 12:27-ish, if that's okay. See you shortly.
Thank you very much. Well, hello everybody. My name is Dan Edge. I'm, as Paul said earlier, if you were here, I'm an actor, model, professional wrestler, lots of other things in between. And I also work as a disability and access consultant for film, television, theatre, and all this wonderful industry that we're in, as well as a couple of other businesses around the world. I've been fortunate enough to work with companies like Virgin, the National Lottery, all kinds of different people. So I get to talk about this stuff kind of a lot. So where do we start? Generally, when we're talking about physical access and for people with physical impairments and disabled people generally, because I never know who's in the room, and I know we've got some quite experienced people in the room listening to Philippa talk earlier. I know this is an area that she's obviously involved in quite a bit, but you never quite know who you've got in the room. So to start with, I think I'm going to talk a little bit about where I come from as a practitioner, as an access consultant, and where I like to work from, so that we're all sort of on the same page. And I subscribe to what's called the social model of disability. Now, for those that don't know what that is, there's various things called models, which are ways of thinking about disability and disabled people. And I subscribe to one called the social model. So I'm going to talk about three really briefly, just to give you an explanation as to what that is. So the first one I'm going to talk about is the charity model, or the charitable model. And the charitable model looks at disability kind of like this. And it sort of goes, oh, look at all the poor disabled people. They can't do anything for themselves. So us non-disabled people are going to give them money, which is going to make us feel brilliant. And then somebody will sort out the disabled people. They'll be able to live their lives to the best that their poor little existence can be. Safe to say, the disabled community, on the whole, aren't necessarily a fan of that model. We don't like it. It's not where we want to be. So then some clever bods, well, clever is not really, the word I'd use, but some people decided, right, okay, about the Second World War, they sort of decided, do you know what? We've got a whole bunch of disabled people now. And what we should really do is use the power of medicine to make them normal. And I do that in big air quotes, because what the heck is normal? But the idea behind the medical model is that we need to fix disabled people. We need to give amputees false limbs. We need to make people with cerebral palsy walk again so that they can be more normal. And we can do that through the miracle of medicine, because then they can fit into society like the rest of us non-disabled people, and we can all live our lives happily ever after. Again, this is not a brilliant model, because this basically puts fault at deaf and disabled people's feet and says, the reason you cannot access the work, the reason you cannot enjoy this theatre show is your fault, because you can't get into the building because we've put stairs there, and you can't get up them because you're a wheelchair user. So we need to fix you so you're not a wheelchair user, so then you can access the building like the rest of us. No. No. Okay, so what we're looking at now is a thing called the social model. And this is where I base a lot of my work, like I've said. And the social model came about in the 1960s and the 1970s. And it was created by more clever disabled people than me. And that's vitally important, because this is the first model of thinking that was actually created for disabled people by disabled people. And it says that it is not our fault. It's not because of our impairments. So the fact that I'm a part-time wheelchair user that walks with sticks, the fact that somebody might be an amputee, the fact that somebody might have just had a hip replacement for whatever reason, like was talked about in the previous session, that makes us disabled. It's the fact that the world is inaccessible and people's attitudes that make us disabled. So in turn, if you've got stairs into your building and I'm a wheelchair user, I can't access it. That's your fault for building a place with stairs, not my fault because I'm a wheelchair user. If you're in a venue in the middle of a forest somewhere and you haven't cleared a path and an amputee can't climb over a giant log, it's because you haven't moved the giant log, not because the amputee can't go through the forest. So coupled that with attitudes that say, oh, you're disabled, so you can't do that. You can't be a performer. You can't be an artist. You can't be a creative because that would be too difficult for you. forms the social model. And it's the fact of the social model focuses on removing barriers to enable everybody to access your work. And the beauty of the social model is that once you've removed those barriers for disabled people, in this case, in terms of this conversation, people with physical impairments, then it also magically becomes more accessible for other people. If it's accessible for a wheelchair user, it's accessible for a young mother with a pram, because guess what? We're going to go on the same journey. If it's accessible for an amputee that can't necessarily walk as far for whatever reason, it's also going to be accessible for your granny that might be in the same sort of boat. So this is where the social model works, and this is where I base all my work in terms of access and being a consultant and trying to encourage theatre, film and television companies to embrace. Now, I'm going to quickly touch on language because Paul mentioned it earlier that he said he'd got some phrasing wrong, and that's probably because he had a conversation with me. So I'm going to quickly touch on that. And it's basically because under the social model, there are so many people in the world generally outside of the social model that are scared to use the words disabled, disability, they're scared they're going to offend people, so on and so forth. So I'm going to explain why I use the words that I do when I'm discussing disability, disabled people, and impairments. When I'm discussing disabled people and impairments, it's because under the social model, being disabled is not a value judgment. It's not about what you can and cannot do. It's a political statement that says I am disabled because those barriers are in my way. All those things that we just spoke about in terms of barriers being in your way and having to remove them to make the work accessible. So the stairs make me disabled. I am disabled as a political judgment rather than a value judgment. In turn, when I talk about impairments, that may be the fact that I have cerebral palsy and I'm a part-time wheelchair user and I walk with sticks. That is my physical impairment. And that's how the two things are defined. So you will see me talking about that in those sort of language terms so that you can follow what I mean when I'm saying impairments and disabled people. Also, disability will get used occasionally, but more as a colloquial group experience. When I talk about the disability or the disabled community, it's in those kind of veins. So we're all on the same sort of page. There we go. Everybody okay with that so far? Feel free to nod. Brilliant. That's what we like. If you do have any questions, though, please feel free to put your hand up in the Q&A section, and I will try and fill any gaps. So, when you're looking at building a show, Philippa very kindly brought it up earlier in the earlier session about how important it is to bake in accessibility from the start. And this is vitally, vitally important. And I use very specific language around this, and I do it on purpose. I will always, always refer to whether it's performers or whether it's audience as access requirements. They are not needs, they are not accommodations, they are requirements. And that is very purposeful because requirements mean you have to do it. Flat out, no question, you have to do it. So you will see people say, I need my accommodations met. You will see people say, I need my access needs met. I will endeavour always to say requirements because then it flags up how important it is for both performers and audience members that those are met. If you say accommodations, it sounds like a nice thing to do. It's like, oh, we will accommodate you, it's fine, we'll go out of our way. You should feel privileged that we're doing it. No, that's charity model, that's medical model. I will always specifically use requirements. Exactly, Philippa, accommodations does sound patronising, but you'll see a lot of our American cousins still use the word accommodations. It's very much in their lexicon. I'm trying to change it by shouting at various people, but yes, so I will always use requirements. And so when you're trying to build a show, whether it be with deaf and disabled talent, or you're focusing specifically on your audience, and I will always focus on talent first, because I think there should be more deaf and disabled talent performing, and we're focusing on artists today and your work. So when you're working with deaf and disabled artists, when you're working with potential deaf and disabled audiences, one of the first questions I always get asked is, well, how can we find out people's access requirements? How do we know? How can we do it? And I'm gonna give you a very complex answer for now. So lean in. Are you ready? You ready? Ask them. Ask them. Ask them what their requirements are. Ask them what their access requirements are. Ask them what they will need to give you the best work, or give them the best experience possible. And I get that, you know, asking somebody could be quite daunting, because you don't want to go, oh, I don't want to say anything wrong. I don't want to use the wrong language. I don't want to do. So my valuable piece of advice, let's start working with deaf and disabled talent first. Let's say you're creating a new show and you want to work with deaf and disabled talent because you know they're amazing and you want to meet their access requirements. Put this into your company policy for everybody, not just deaf and disabled talent, but for everybody. Whenever you invite any talent to an audition, to an interview, to anything like that, just send out an extra piece of paper, an extra email, or an extra BSL video if you're dealing with people that are deaf, you know, all those kind of things. But we're working on physical impairments today, so I won't go into that. But with that sort of invite to interview or invite to audition, just send out a piece of paper or an extra line on the email to everyone, disabled or otherwise, going, can you please let us know of any access requirements you have so that we can discuss these with you and meet them to the best of our ability. Because by popping that on the end of your emails, on the end of your paperwork, all of a sudden you've opened the door to me as a deaf and disabled performer to go, wow, okay, these guys want to work with me and they're willing to talk to me about my access requirements and how best to meet them. And I will happily go. I'm a part-time wheelchair user. I walk with sticks. Can you let me know if there's any stairs into the venue? If there is, I might need somebody to carry my chair in for me, because for me personally, that works. For somebody else, that might not. But that's why you ask everyone, because then you can meet their access needs to the best of your ability. You can meet those requirements for them, because physical impairment or any impairment is so personal. You can get stuff that fits everybody to an extent, like ramps for wheelchair users are going to benefit a huge amount of people, but it doesn't mean they're going to work for everybody. So the first thing you do is send out a form so you can tailor as much as possible. I get that smaller companies don't have huge budgets, but this is why you open that discussion to go, these are my access requirements, and you as a company can go, well, we can do this for you right now. Is that okay? Can we discuss another way around it? Simple as that. And that is one of the best ways you can engage deaf and disabled talent. On top of that, you know, you'll find that by meeting some of your deaf and disabled talents needs, say, for example, somebody with a physical impairment might need some extra rest breaks. Guess what? That means you get extra time to work with the rest of the cast, or the rest of the cast get a rest break as well, and everybody's happy. It benefits everybody in terms of your creative process. It means that you can plan your creative process that little bit more. And it probably means you're going to get a better product as an end result all the way around. Now, in terms of audience requirements and their access requirements, here we go. Here's another bit of information. Listen in. It's exactly the same. Exactly the same. So if you can say, for example, you're running your ticketing through City of Culture, because I know City of Culture is a thing, that's why we're here today. If you say to City of Culture, great, I'm going to sell my show, I want to know my audience's access requirements, so when they book a ticket, please can you get them to email on the end of the email to say, please could you email this email address for this show so we know your access requirements in advance and we can do our best to meet them. And it opens up that conversation with your audience member. Now, you might not get a lot of responses to begin with, because this is quite a new thing for a lot of people. People will go, oh God, what are access requirements? I don't know. But at the same time, if you want to add a little bit of a descriptor, it could be, we want to support our deaf and disabled audience members. If you have any access requirements that would make your ability to enjoy our show all the more, please let us know. And then you've given them a bit more information. And it means as a show, and it means, like our guys from Fab earlier, they knew that there was a lady up in her window that needed to see the show. So they were able to adjust accordingly. Now, it doesn't mean that everybody has to move their stage, because not everybody can do that, let's be fair. But it does give you that time to process, going, okay, we've got 2 wheelchair users, 1 amputee, and 1 person walking on sticks tonight. Where are we going to sit them? Where are we going to move them? Where are we going to give them the best experience possible? And it gives you that time to plan. Also, we were talking about access riders to venues saying that you require this. Great, do it. I will holler that till kingdom come. But if you're in a venue where that doesn't quite work, when you're designing your work, think about things, think about examples that are going to challenge you. I mean, I know Paul won't mind me mentioning this, but we were talking about his work coming up and the fact that it's potentially in a cathedral. And I literally said to him, Paul, is that cathedral surrounded by cobblestones? And he said, yes. Now, cobblestones for somebody with a physical impairment can be an absolute nightmare. Absolute nightmare. Because wheelchairs generally don't come with suspension. They don't. The only suspension in my chair is my spine. And I can bounce, but other people can't necessarily. So Paul and I had a quick conversation about, okay, can we cover those cobblestones with matting? Is there an alternate route that we could go around? And it's about thinking about that from day one. Like Philippa said earlier, that the quicker you build access for anybody, but like I say, we're talking specifically about physical impairments today, but the quicker you can look at access for those groups of people at the start of your process, it's going to be so much easier, trust me, as somebody that has to do this regularly in my consultancy job for a company called Sea Talent, than it is to reverse engineer. To go, oh my God, I didn't realize there was cobblestones and we've got 3 scenes here that I need people to dance around the floor with. And then have to rework it. So it's about putting that consideration in first. If you've got a show that is people walking through the forest, because our friends at Fab talked about that earlier. If you're walking through a forest, is there places to sit on part of the way? Because somebody with a physical impairment won't be able to stand all the way through. If you're walking through the forest, I mentioned it earlier, is there a giant log in the way that people are going to have to step over? Because I don't want to do a wheelie over a giant log. It's about those things. But again, the benefit of putting in all this hard work, it isn't just for people like myself that are disabled, but it will benefit other members of your audience, be they older, be they new mothers with prams. As much as we fight for bus spaces, there is sort of a mutual respect there. It's one of those things, and it's about trying to meet those needs. And then, if possible, because you're not going to know the ins and outs of somebody's impairment. Is it possible on your show, on the ticketing system, to potentially offer a companion ticket to somebody who has an impairment so that they can bring somebody with them that understands their needs, to not entirely remove you of all responsibility, because that's not the case, but you'll know that there is somebody there to support that person to access your show. And that is vital across all impairments. Also, as somebody with a physical impairment, and I will shout this to the hills, please, please always consider toilets. And I know that's not the most glamorous thing. I know that's not arty or creative or anything. But it's always a fear for anyone with a physical impairment to fear, am I going to be able to access a toilet at this show? Especially if you're in unusual outdoor spaces. Because if you're in a standard venue, there is generally some kind of provision. Not always, but generally there is some kind of provision. But if you're going through a forest, I don't want to go around the back of some stinging nettles. If you're going, through all of that stuff, just please let me know as a disabled audience member or disabled talent that there are toilets that I will be able to access readily, that are accessible. If you want to have the gold standard, please try and make them a changing place. But at least accessible. If you can, a changing place. So yeah, basically the upshot is, if you want to make stuff more accessible to people with physical impairments, talk to them, find out how to do it, and just work on some basics. Make sure, you have wheelchair access. Make sure you've assessed the venue for all possibilities. And if you don't know, and you can afford to, employ someone like me as a consultant to do it for you or with you. If you can't, then fine, but pull on disabled people's lived experience, but also value that experience. Don't expect it to always come for free, because so many disabled people are asked to do it for free. But yeah, just think about it. And there are people that know. So ask them, but be willing to invest in them for that knowledge, because that knowledge will sell you more tickets, which will make your show more money. It benefits everybody. And it means more people see your work, more people know how brilliant it is, and more people have a positive experience. How's that for a talk, Paul?
Wonderful. I mean, I learned so much in just the talk with you the other week, but now there's even more things spiraling from my head, which would be great to pick up on. I guess the first question I have is, do you have any good examples of organizations, shows, whatever it might be, that have successfully asked people what they need?
I mean, I personally was in a show, but it was designed for disabled audiences specifically. So of course it was going to be really good. A show called White Peacock with the Nottingham Playhouse a few years ago, which was designed for young people with profound and multiple learning disabilities and difficulties. So that show was designed completely for them. And especially when you're dealing with, young people with profound and multiple learning disabilities or difficulties, whichever term they prefer. For example, many of them had never been to a theatre before, so they were just experiencing a room going dark for the first time. And it's about making them feel comfortable in the space. But in terms of physical impairments, do you know one of the most exciting things for me as somebody with a physical impairment, as a part-time wheelchair user, especially in spaces that aren't necessarily a traditional theatre space, would be to have the flexibility to sit anywhere. And I know that sounds crazy, but in cinemas and in theatres, there's generally a couple of seats that can be removed and I'm always going to be in the same spot. But if your show gives me the flexibility to sit anywhere that I want with my friends and still be able to see everything, that's going to be weirdly liberating. Because I can sit where I want. If I want to sit at the front because I want to see everything, great. If I want to sit at the back so I don't get picked on by the stand-up comedian, brilliant. So having flexibility, and we talked about flexibility in the previous session, is a skill. And I know it's not possible with all shows and there are going to be limitations, but if you can offer that, that's going to be strangely liberating. And I think it's just about shows that are willing to take those advanced steps. Take those advanced steps and go, you know, what do you need? Because I'm all of a sudden going to pay more attention to that show. And the more it becomes baked into companies' practices, the more everybody knows it's commonplace.
And I think that's the thing as well that I've been picking up from you, both from this conversation and the one before, is the access requirement form that you're very passionate about, rightly so. Like, it's something that should be sent out to everyone. It's not just, oh, you look disabled, here's a form. It's something which really, I was thinking about the City of Culture ticketing system, and you get sent out a PDF with your ticket on. Like, next to that, you should, I mean, we could get onto PDFs. I know you're passionate about that as well. But you get your ticket in a document or a PDF or something, and next to that, it would be so simple to put an access form as well, or it should be anyway. So simple to put a form saying what do you need to be able to experience this performance.
Exactly. And I think as well, you know, if you've been a company that's been creative enough and forward-thinking enough to meet people's access needs in advance, physical or otherwise. So if you've got signed performances, for example, looking at our lovely interpreter Erin waving her hands at me right now, then let everybody know you've got signed performances. Try and, if you can afford to do it, try and make that every show, just not one show on the calendar. If you can make every show signed, or every show have captions, or every show be physically accessible to wheelchair users, do it. Because it should be. Like Philippa said earlier, it's a human rights thing, it's an Equality Act thing, it's the law. So do everything you can to make it accessible. But also, as much as the laws are there and they're brilliant, try and go beyond that. Because the laws are great, but I have issues with the laws as a campaigner and as an access consultant. Because the law basically has this wonderful phrase in it called reasonable adjustments. Pippa's nodding at me. Now, the thing is with reasonable adjustments is who decides what's reasonable? And it's officially by law, the company decides what's reasonable for them within their budget constraints and so on and so forth. But what's reasonable, for example, might be a portable ramp into your local Wagamama's, but that portable ramp into your local Wagamama's is at a 50-degree angle, which is impossible to push up. The ramp exists, the access is there, it's reasonable, but it doesn't necessarily meet anybody's access requirements. So use that law as a basis, but go beyond it. Always challenge yourselves to go beyond it in whatever way you can.
Let's just switch over BSL interpreters for a second. Thanks, Erin. Welcome, Gloria.
Indeed. There we go. So yeah, always try and go beyond those minimum requirements, because they are literally a guide. A legal one that you have to meet, but a guide. And the best way to go beyond that is to use access requirement forms, open up those conversations, but do it with everybody, because also nobody wants to be singled out. Nobody, like you said, Paul, nobody wants to go, oh, you look disabled, here's a form. You know? And also by doing the, oh, you look disabled, here's a form thing, you run that whole gambit of like the pregnant lady on the tube scenario that isn't really pregnant and might get slightly offended. And you don't want to do that. If you send one out to everybody, nobody gets offended. They just go, oh, that doesn't matter to me. But to the people it does matter to, it means the world. Because it means that you want to let them have the best experience of your show possible.
I think like I've been reflecting on it quite a bit since, because I've started working with 6 participants, and what I should have done, which I didn't have my chat with you before I started with them, so I wish I did, but what I should have done at the beginning was ask those questions of what might prohibit you from engaging with this, what access requirements do you have. And when we did our first session with them, I've got like a mix of ages through these 6 people, mix of abilities, disabilities, and through the session they sort of were saying, oh yeah, I've got dodgy knees and things like that, which is just like an aging thing. It's not, it's just that. And I think if I knew that at the beginning, I could make those adjustments to that session to accompany that. Luckily, the session wasn't a physical session or anything, but if it had been, that person would not be able to have as rich an experience as the other people in the group. And so I think what I should have done at the beginning, and what I'm going to do now before our next session, is send out a form saying, can you let us know of any access requirements you might have? And then we can at least have those in our mind when we're crafting our workshops.
Exactly. And it's as simple as that. And communication is key. Because like I say, everybody's different. What works for me might not work for you, Paul, might not work for Lisa, might not work for Isaac, Philippa, Francis, Derek, even Gloria. Like, it might not work because your access needs are going to be different to mine. My impairment is cerebral palsy, but cerebral palsy has a spectrum as wide as the rainbow. You look at me and you look at Rosie Jones, who's probably one of the most famous people in the country with cerebral palsy, stand-up comedian. She's on a whole bunch of stuff for Channel 4. We're completely different. But we have, in medical terms, we have the same impairment. But our access needs are entirely different. Our access requirements are entirely different. So this is why communication is so important. And it's really just as simple as embedding into your practice to ask from day dot, what are your access requirements? That's not a magic bullet, and it's not going to solve everything, but it gets that conversation going, it gets that thought process going, it makes you look at different ways to make your show accessible, whatever anybody's impairment is. And that's pretty much the biggest sort of overarching thing I can give you as a takeaway.
Good takeaway to have. I know this isn't quite physical impairments, but please do give us a little snapshot of why PDFs are the devil's document.
PDFs are the devil's document for so many reasons. I know everybody loves them, and I know they're pretty, and I know like they let you fill in stuff and tick stuff, but they are probably the most inaccessible form of document on the planet, because they are not readable by screen readers. They are really hard for visually impaired people. They are not adaptable for people with dyslexia. They are not adaptable for people that are autistic. Do you know the most accessible document on the planet, pretty much, give or take? is a Word document, a basic, simple Word document that you allow to be editable, because then screen readers can read it if you're visually impaired. If you're dyslexic or autistic and you prefer the font in different colors, different fonts, different shapes, different sizes, you can adjust it to your own access requirement. You can still put signatures on a Word document, even if it's an image that you've had to drag and drop, it's possible. Excel sheets are awful too, yes, they are, but generally they're not sent out as much as PDFs on the whole. But yeah, PDFs are the devil. They look pretty, and it doesn't mean you have to stop using PDFs. I've not got an aversion to companies using PDFs, but please, if you are going to use PDFs, just have an accessible Word document on the side. Just do both. For the seconds it's going to take you, do both. And to the point that in Word, I was working on a document for somebody recently, they now even let you put alt text on images in Word so that screen readers can describe your images for you. That is how accessible it is. PDFs don't offer any of that. They're secure, they're nice, they're shiny, but they don't offer any access. So yeah, make your PDF, but please make a Word document to go with it.
Does anybody have any questions they would like to ask towards Dan? I guess then, oh, Philippa, were you coming in? No. I guess then I'd quite like to...
Oh, Lisa's got her hand up.
Get to Lisa and then, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. It was just something, so we've obviously all spent a lot of time on Zoom this year.
Mm-hmm.
And it made me think, Paul, when you said about, oh, thankfully we weren't in the room, so it was a little easier. But I've been really aware of a lot of sort of access requirements in Zoom over the last year. And I just wondered, Dan, if you had any thoughts around that. So while lots of things are still kind of hybrid online and in person, if there were any kind of main things that scream at you, do this to make my life easier or other people's lives easier within the online?
I think one of the big sort of comebacks I've had from fellow members of the disabled community, not necessarily physical impairments, but it counts for guys with physical impairments as well, is just be wary of how long your Zoom sessions are. Because for somebody with a physical impairment sitting in the same spot, I mean, if any of you were observant, you'll have seen me stretching as I was watching the session this morning, but that's just because sitting in the same spot for a while can be challenging for somebody with a physical impairment. They do need to move around. Also though, for my colleagues again on the autistic spectrum or various visual impairments, looking at a screen for a long time is hard work. So just be wary about the length of time. I mean, one thing that a lot of places have now cottoned onto is the lovely use of our BSL interpreter friends like Gloria, because it's made people a lot more aware of that, which is great. I don't think we'd be in a similar position if we hadn't gone through the pandemic, having been to numerous events without BSL interpreters. So that's great. But yeah, I think screen time, also if you're visually impaired, be aware that for a lot of visually impaired people, the chat window on Zoom is a nightmare, because they'll be trying to listen to you, but their screen reader will be trying to read the chat window at the same time. So they'll have multiple voices going on and it will just be a nightmare to follow. So be aware that if you're going to run a Zoom session with anybody that's visually impaired, that the chat function is not necessarily an option, as are like the reactions and the hand raising thing. So make sure, like you did at the start of the session, Lisa, you were very good to say, put your physical hand up if that works for you, and have somebody looking out for that. because for visually impaired people, the chat function is a nightmare.
Fab. Any other questions before?
Philippa has a virtual hand up.
Oh, Philippa. Sorry.
It was just something that jogged me to think of, that it's not really a question, but I was at an event that was a kind of participatory, involving people thing, and one of the things they asked people to do at one point was some clapping, and it was about some different rhythms and stuff. And I was there with somebody who has a chronic pain condition, and that was really awful for them, and they didn't want to do it. And somebody else was there who had some sensory issues, so clapping is not something they like to do. But there was some insistence coming from, come on, join in. And the same thing about asking people to stand up if you want to do that. That's, don't say that. It's kind of like stand up, or if that's not the right thing for you, raise your hand. It's about not, I think sometimes those instructions to do things which may be physically difficult can be a real barrier to people feeling included. And be aware that in your audience you might not be able to see that somebody has a particular need, like dodgy knees. It might not be easy for them to stand up quickly, and that's not only about people who might define themselves as disabled. It can be about, as you say, somebody who's just a bit older, or actually just not feeling very good today.
Yeah, I think one of the best phrases that I often hear thrown around when it comes to a situation like that is, please stand or do whatever is accessible to you. So then it gives your audience member the choice of, I can't stand, I can't clap, I can't, I can do what, I might be able to tap my chair, or I might be able to, tap my chest, or I might not be able to do it at all, but I've been given the option to do what is accessible to me. Derek, you're virtually waving at me. Hello.
Hi, Dan. That was really great. Thank you very much. It was a one around language, really, because I'm constantly dismayed by the intelligent journalists using sort of thoughtless, pejorative language, like, I read in The Independent like a couple of months ago, he was wheelchair bound, and those sort of. So I suppose the question is, what language do you want to get to in terms of the general understanding, and how do we respond to those things, which, because it's easy to put somebody down, but then gently guide them towards the positive language and the actual recognizing that a wheelchair is an enabler, not a,
Indeed. You're a wheelchair user, you're not bound to it unless you're into some kind of crazy sex game, but that's your own personal choice. No judgment whatsoever. Yeah, you're a wheelchair user. So I think in terms of language, personally for me, and language is a very subjective personal thing, and this is half the battle with language. Personally for me, I very much, as I said at the beginning of the talk, subscribe to the social model, and as being disabled people because we're disabled by our environment, so on and so forth, and impairments and so on. And that's where I'd like to be, because I think it reframes disability as something that is not down to me, my body, or anything other. It's just society needs to change the way it works. In terms of people that do use challenging language, I would just politely sort of say to them, if it's a debate you want to have, especially within your company, you go, on the whole, with our company, we don't use this language because we prescribe to the social model of disability, and we use the terms disabled people, impairment, so on. But at the same time, if you want to personally identify that way, for you and nobody else, we will respect your personal choice when it comes to you. And I think, you can have those discussions around language and why it's wheelchair user and not wheelchair bound. you can have those discussions on why it's disabled people. And a lot of it is down to education. And, you know, I'm quite fortunate now that I get paid to educate people about these things rather than having to do it for free. But yeah, I think it's about being open and honest about the conversation. But I think language definitely needs to be at a place where it doesn't put the onus on the disabled person, and it isn't driven by the charitable and medical model that kind of feed one another. I mean, look at Children in Need and Red Nose Day, and look at how inspiration porn is a thing. And you can see that the charity and the medical model feed one another, especially in most recent government reports. They're still driven by the medical model of disability, and your ability to pass a physical test determines how disabled you are. So it's ingrained in our society, and it's going to be difficult to shift. But if the arts community does it as a whole, we all know that the arts has the power to change people's perception, be that theatre, film or television. So we've got more power than any other industry to change the world. So if we can start from a social model perspective and start putting that into our performances and into our work, then hopefully gradually it will seep into society. Philippa, you're waving your virtual hand at me again. Hi.
I was just interested in that use of the word impairment, because my understanding is that some people who are disabled do not like that term, because they don't want to be described as impaired, because it suggests potentially less than, if you like, something that's been reduced. And particularly, so thinking about people who are partially sighted, prefer partially sighted sometimes to sight impaired, but not everybody. And so I just wondered if you could talk a little bit more about that, and because obviously you've talked from your perspective, and yes. I kind of worry that if I use that term impairment, I might offend some other people.
But that's why I just said, you know, a couple of minutes ago, is that if you say to somebody, look, I'm doing this because I follow the social model, but however, if it's a term you do not like for whatever reason, I'm willing to change it for you personally, and I won't refer to you in that way. In a similar way to, and it's by no means the same argument, but it's something I can draw sort of parity to in terms of pronouns within the LGBT plus community. You know, a lot of people use he, him, she, her. Some people prefer they, them, and so on. And I think in terms of, you know, language around disability and disabled people and the right language to use, I would always, for me, and I think large swathes of the community would champion social model language. However, if people don't like the word impairment for whatever their personal reason may be, in the same way somebody might not like a particular pronoun, it's okay to say, fine, I'm sorry, if that's the term you prefer for your own personal description, I will use it for you from now on. Because I don't.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I guess it's tricky then in things like for example, this session. Before I spoke to you, it was physical disabilities working in non-traditional spaces, and that's what is going on print and is going out to the public. And then in conversation with you, the term you preferred was physical impairment. So of course we changed it to that because that you're leading the session, so it feels wrong to force you to abide by a term you don't like. But it's difficult, as I think Philippa was sort of getting at, is how do other people who are not keen on that term, how do you make those outwards communication, I guess, of your organization, of your event, make that aware, make sure that people are aware that that is the term you're using because Dan told you. Dan told us to do that.
Dan told us this is what we should be saying. I think at the current stage that we're at in terms of language, I am not particularly offended if somebody puts a slash So physical impairment / disability. However, just on a note from our friends in the deaf community, please stop using D/D. It's just capital D, because that's a whole ableism thing kind of going on. So it's just capital D now from our friends in the deaf community, because the deaf model, again, slightly differentiates from the social model because they don't like the word impairment. They don't see deaf in the cultural model of deafness. They do not see deafness as an impairment. They don't feel they've lost anything. So they don't like the word impairment. So they just like to be referred to as deaf, plain and simple, or hard of hearing. At the moment is generally the accepted language within the deaf community. So yeah, please, if you are using D/D, like capital D, little d, please stop.
That's really interesting because well, we've had a whole session about that, but the capital D representing people who are engaged with deaf culture as opposed to people who have become deaf later, perhaps, as an example. That's
exactly, yeah.
You know, and so it feels to me that it's just capital D comes from the people who engage with deaf culture, not from the people who don't. So that's why it's got both, because some people wouldn't want to be I am deaf with a capital D, and actually some people don't even want to admit that.
No,
that's another challenge in terms of our communication, that we're, by using one to not offend one group of people, we're potentially then putting off another group of people.
This is the thing with any diverse group in terms of languages. I mean, you know, you look at our friends of the LGBT plus community, you look at our friends in, you know, different minorities in terms of race and so on. Everybody prefers their own personal language, and I think it's whatever diverse group you're dealing with, there's going to be somebody that's not happy with the way you've said something. I think as long as you research for you as a company things like the social model, and you then, if somebody challenges you on it, you can then go, I understand what your personal preference is, but for example, we subscribe to the social model. This is why we use the language that we use. So you can back up your argument with a proper thought process, rather than, this is why, because I decided to call everybody wheelchair bound today, and that's the word I've always used, so it's obviously the right one. As long as you can sort of go and say, for example, I keep using the social model because that's what I'm talking about, but I've studied the social model. This is what we've decided to use as a company. This is the language attached to it. These are the reasons why. Then even if somebody disagrees with you, they can go, well, I disagree with you. And you can go, well, that's fine. Can we ask why? And you might then take that into your practice and want to change your opinion. But I would argue that as long as you can back up the reasons for your choices, and they are not derogatory and they are not, you know, you're fair. For example, you might say, I want to write impairment because it's social model, but I want to write / disability because I know a lot of people don't necessarily understand impairment as language. You've got a valid argument there. And I, as a consultant, would go, okay, fair enough.
I guess that was sort of my, Francis, I promise I will come to you, don't worry. That was sort of my finding through working towards making my show a bit more accessible to deaf and blind audiences, was particularly when I created the pack at the end, I had to say, this is the terminology I'm using and this is why. And I think I even sort of apologize if you do not abide by that terminology. And so it's sort of easy to do there, and it's sort of possible to do on your company website. I guess it's more difficult on things like this, where you're putting out just a statement that this is a session that is focusing on physical impairment / disabilities, with just an image or with just a title. It's harder to capture why you've done that, but I guess maybe my thought is that if you're sending that out in a tweet, you can tag a tweet underneath saying here's why we are using this terminology.
Yeah, or you go, we're doing a session with about with and about disabled people within the arts, because disabled people and deaf people are generally accepted terms globally. Some people will argue for people with disabilities, but again, that's not social model. That's putting it back on the person who has the impairment. So I would argue, we're doing a session with and for or about deaf and disabled people. This time we're focusing on those with physical impairment / disabilities. You've covered it because you've gone disabled people, because that's the globally accepted term. You've deaf people, globally accepted term. And we're talking about physical impairments / disabilities. You've covered it in 2 lines. And you've covered just about everybody's understanding of language, because somebody that doesn't understand impairment will go, I don't get that. Oh, but disabilities I know and understand. And then within the session like today, I can educate people on why I would choose to use impairment.
Francis?
All right, yeah, to be honest, it's really echoing what you are saying, that it's the communication of the amount of consideration that you've put in to arrive to that term. And yes, the term, whichever that you use, you might upset a group of people, but it's the thought, that the process that you would please people, because it's the thought that you make the time to consider, or that's really what's the process itself needs to communicate to others, that people would appreciate, I think. Yeah.
It's how we make that visible is a challenge for us to figure out a bit, is how we make those processes that we've gone through thinking about that more outwards in approach, rather than just a thing that happens behind closed doors and then we put something out. Derek, this might be probably the last question.
Yeah, it's a quickie. It's just a signpost, really. I'll put the link in the chat, but we'll mention it as well. A lot of my understanding around disability has come from working with an artist called Claire Cunningham, and she did a series of podcasts, which I had a good fortune to work on, called the Guide Gods Digital Collection, which is around faith and disability, but also covers some of the stuff we've been talking about today. So if you just Google Claire Cunningham Guide Gods, it'll take you. So like guide dogs, but gods. Yeah.
And Paul, can I just add that Derek and I mean, Talking Birds has done quite a lot of different things over the years because of working in lots of unusual spaces, as to make work. And we realised that there was some stuff that we could maybe contribute to this, but we've run out of time, so we think we'll probably do a separate little video or something about it with images that can be added onto the Access Coventry resources, because I think Des has done lots of stuff over the years, so that might just be a useful thing to note.
Lovely. Yeah, that would be great. And I guess we can, on the YouTube video, link to that as well. So yeah, if you did, that would be fab. We've got to wrap it up now, sadly. But just to say, firstly, a big thank you to Fabularium, who are mid-show right now, probably. But also huge thank you to Dan for your wisdom on all things accessible. I'll never use a PDF ever again, don't you worry. The devil's document, as I'll call it from now on. But yeah, so much to take away from that and to put into our practices and to think about. So I hope that's been useful for everyone else also. Thank you to Gloria and Erin for your BSL. Wonderful as always. Thanks to Lisa for her contribution to the technical wizardry of Zoom. Just to say that next week's session, so I'll put a link in the chat. I think most are sort of already signed up in this group, but just so we've got it. I'll put a link in the chat, which is for the upcoming sessions. Next week, we're joined by Rachel from Frontline Dance, who'll be talking about relaxed events and relaxed performances. It's a term that's sort of come around quite a lot lately, but there's a bit of mystery as to what exactly that is. So if you're interested in finding out more about relaxed performances or relaxed events, the next week's session at the exact same time is for you. If you want to catch up on the previous sessions, let me just find the link for that. I now have finally done my homework and uploaded the videos to YouTube for all previous sessions. This session will also go on to there. Just give me a second and I'll find the link for you. So we've put it in a nice little playlist for you. So it should be, oh, there's a mirror. So if you follow the YouTube link in the chat, then that will allow you to access all the other sessions. And I think that's everything. And then finally, just to say for those in Coventry, there's still an access fund available for £1,000 on the City of Culture website for specifically to put some things that we are talking about into practice, to buy some stuff to cover the cobbled floor at the cathedral potentially. Any of those sorts of things that will help people access your event. So there's a fund specifically for events that are happening over the next year through City of Culture. So if you are creating work in Coventry, there is a little pocket of funding for you to put some of this practice into practice. Thank you once again. Thanks for those who joined as well today. Please do share, spread the word, spread the link with anybody that you think might find this useful. I shall see you in the upcoming weeks.